Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Deltarune theory video. I think I might have said earlier I had one more in me, but no. This is it. This is the last knight theory. I do have an idea of what I want to do next, but it might take me more than 1 week to do it. Oh no! Aghast! That said, I do want to thank you guys for supporting this series as you have. Very nice of you. Give yourself a golf clap of applause. And yeah, this is all the knight candidates that defy logic. And what I mean by that is not that they literally are like impossible, but if we're gonna look at the grand scope of the game as we know it right now, it's pretty much like shouting at the wind. They barely exist. So, you know, instead of like reasoned evidence, we're going to have a lot of wishy-washy theory crafting, which, I mean, come on. I know you guys love it. Else you wouldn't be here. All right, let us just begin. With part 1, Azrael Knight. So, Azrael is a big character, okay? If he was the knight, it'd be a big deal. He's not irrelevant, let's say that. And we haven't seen him yet in the game. We've only heard about him being at college. Who knows? He's connected to the Delta Space Rune prophecy in Undertale through being a candidate for being the angel. If you don't remember the prophecy from Undertale that Gerson tells you, it's called the prophecy of the Delta Rune. Delta Space Rune. It's something along the lines of, yeah, well, us monsters are underground. That's the representation of the down arrow. And then the humans are above us. That's the up arrow. So the up arrow's the angel's gonna come down and free us. And that either means we're gonna go free from the barrier or we're gonna all die. But we won't be in this cave anymore after the angel shows up. And the only requirement is like, the angel is someone who's seen the surface in that, prophecy, which obviously Azrael did when he went through the barrier with Kara's body and got murdered. So that kind of makes sense. He also does assist in making the underground go empty. I think it's more likely that the angel is meant to represent like either Frisk or us as the player, you know, somebody who's seen the surface and is coming to this world to change it one way or the other. But he is instrumental in that. So and I mean, also he just wears the Delta Rune. So much like the other Dreamers, there is some stuff going on there, you know. He has a reason to make the fountains near Chris, or maybe it's just places he used to go. I don't think it's ever exactly confirmed, but I think Alvin maybe has a line, something about it, where he says, Azrael may have been taught by Gerson. Gerson used to be a teacher anyway, and Gerson's classroom seems like a middle school to high school classroom, because like you wouldn't have chess for like elementary school kids, right? Or even really card games. Maybe Go Fish, but it'd probably be like, you know, kiddie cards. They'd have like fish on them or something instead of being straight up cards. And yeah, there's some stuffed animals and stuff, but maybe it was used for like a combined grade when the town was smaller because the school only had like one teacher. That could be possible too. We don't know. But perhaps Azrael was in that classroom and that's why that fountain connects to him or whatever. We do see, and this is later in the slide, but we do see little hints of him around, which is interesting. In Chapter 2, which I don't know where the Chapter 2 went, but it was supposed to say Chapter 2 Mansion Room. Of all the rooms that Queen has made rooms based off the search data of basically all the kids in the class that are in Chris's class, and then also Azrael for some reason, which is a little suspicious. Like, and Chris doesn't want to look in there, extra suspicious. But on the other hand, Queen also doesn't know who the knight is, so maybe like she doesn't realize that Azrael's the knight, but knows that Azrael recently used the computer. Or like it like tracked in her processor, but she didn't like put the points together. I don't know. That doesn't seem super strong, but it's something. And also, obviously, Ralsei in general, but also Ralsei's room for Chris in the castle town basically gives Chris Ralsei's side of the or Asriel's side of the room. There's going to be a lot of that if I ever have to say Ralsei. Because, yeah, it's an anagram of Asriel. Another thing. Just pile it all on. Everybody loves Asriel. In the town, you know, you got Burger Pants talking about him. Caddy and Bratty talk about him. QC, the diner lady, talks about him. Alvin talks about him. Everybody loves this guy. So if he turned out to be the big villain, it would be a pretty serious twist. You know what I mean? It would affect the characters in the world. So that is a point, I would say. At least metatextually. He uses an attack called the Hyper Goner in Undertale. And that's interesting considering, obviously, Gaster seems to have a big presence in Deltarune, and we do the Goner Maker. So, Hyper Goner, maybe it's related. It is possible, though, because, like, the literal definition of Hyper Goner, if you, like, broke it down, would be, like, hyper means to go beyond, and then Goner is their word for, like, dying. So, like, to go beyond death, as in, like, you are being wiped from existence, which is what Asriel's plan is. Kind of. It's to, like, wipe everything back to the beginning. Hyper Goner, you do not exist at all. It makes some sense. And then the Darkners happen to kind of mechanically resemble Flowey, if they work the way that I think they work, which is that they are objects with no souls brought to life by the determination of a lightner stabbing the ground and making a dark fountain. So in that case, they're objects without souls, like Flowey was an object without a soul. The metaphysical Undertale concept of soul, anyway. And then, you know, infused with determination, comes to life as a being. That does seem very Flowey-esque, so if Asriel's the one doing it, it would be very ironic. He's connected to the Des plotline. So, like, I mean, that was a big thing for Death Knight, is that she seems relevant to the main story. If Asriel's motive is to find Des, then it would make sense that he's revisiting these nostalgic locations. Especially if Asriel did use Gerson's classroom, like he did at one point go to school there, because Des would have gone to school there with him. And there is some hints that that might be the case. Noelle calls the twin ribbons, which you find one ribbon in the cyber world and one ribbon in the Card Kingdom, nostalgic, which is a little weird. Are those Des's ribbons, maybe? Maybe? And so Asriel's trying to go the places that she would go to try to find her in the Dark World for some reason. I don't know how he would know that, but I don't know how any of the knights know that. So, blowing past that, who knows? Maybe the answer is even piles of Asriel's dust. If you don't know why this is all bolded and just like, ified, it's because this is a theory people like to joke around about a bit. That my apparent doppelganger, Jaru J, who people say I sound like, I don't feel like I do, but I don't know. It's different when you go through a microphone, right? It's like when you're talking to somebody over the phone and then your voice to them sounds completely different than it does to you actually speaking it because of how the head works. But anyway, I don't think I sound like him. This theory is basically that Chris was trying to prank Asriel, and somehow that went wrong in terms of Asriel getting stabbed. And it's based on Chris's search history for sharpest kitchen knife jello or something. And then Asriel died, and so the Dark Fountains are being made to try to bring him back, and maybe he's Ralsei and blah, you know. So if that did happen, maybe that's related to, you know, the Knight, in that he's like a essence-infused Darkner. So he's got the powers, like the determination of a Lightner, and basically is just Flowey again. Maybe? I mean, it seems a little lame, but who knows? So, speaking of, knocks against Azrael Knight. Well, other than the caveat you have to have for all of these theories I'm going to say today, which is there's literally no evidence, other than vibes, there's a few other things we could talk about. How is Azrael doing this? And this isn't even considering the fact of the piles of Azrael's dust. How does Darkner Azrael get around? I don't know. Unless he's literally Ralsei, but I digress. That makes the whole Chris Ralsei relationship arc thing really awkward if it's true. That's like some Star Wars Luke and Leia situation. Anyway, how is Azrael getting around? And I've said this for other people, right? I've been like, oh, if, you know, Rudy was walking around and somebody saw him, they'd be like, what the hell are you doing out, Rudy? Are you better? So it kind of makes it way harder for them to be the knight versus somebody like Alvin or the mayor or Noelle or Chris even, who can just wander around the town and people won't really pay attention to them, right? Because they're supposed to be there, especially at the school or the library. A little bit less for the school for Alvin, but I explained that in the Alvin video, which you probably already watched. Azrael, if we've already kind of discussed, everybody loves this guy. Everybody's like, oh, when's Azrael coming back in town? He's so awesome. If he was walking around town, everybody would know about it. And the first person they'd want to tell is Chris. So Azrael would have to be like really good at hiding his identity in order to be able to pull this off somehow. Like he'd have to have, like, I don't even think you could just like explain it as he's wearing like the boatman hood or something from Undertale, the ferryman hood, which Ralsei wears in the first scene, so maybe that's like a hint or something, because people would still be like, who's this hooded figure, you would think, but I don't know. It's not impossible, and he could like prowl around at night, but it is a knock against the plausibility of it. And speaking of running around at night, where the hell would he be living? I mean, he's not living in his house. So if he's like doing this like dark world stuff and trying to keep it secret for some reason, we don't really know why. Like if he was coming back to town to do this, why wouldn't he just come back to town and be like, hey mom, I'm back early, and then just sneak out at night from his room? Like, I don't know. I guess you could make the argument that he doesn't trust Chris, or like doesn't want to get Chris involved. But if that's the case, like, I don't know. I feel like camping out in the woods to do this is a very extreme decision. Maybe he's living in the bunker. Who knows? But the fact that he's like not home, like why he feels the need to take all these extra steps to hide that he's even in town, feels a little weird. And then, what is his motivation? Because if it is just to find Des, then why the hell did he abandon the Chapter 2 fountain? I guess this is kind of the same point again, almost. Because it's like, what does it matter if he's seen in town? Like, if Noelle and Birdley see him, if his goal is to find Des, he could just be like, Noelle, I'm trying to find your sister. Will you help me? Like, I didn't want to get you involved, but don't tell anybody about this. It's dangerous. Something like that. You know? And, like, what would his other motivation be, unless it is to find Des? Is it just to, like, help Chris? Because if that's the case, then why not go on the adventure with them? I mean, maybe he wants to help Chris break out of their shell without him being around, because everybody... He's like, Chris is constantly in Azrael's shadow, so Azrael wants to do this without Chris seeing, and it's actually, like, a really, like... you know, well thought out ARG almost he's creating for Chris and friends. Maybe, but it is dangerous. Like, Birdley dies, or at least quote unquote dies. We don't really know if he's actually dead, but it seems pretty far-fetched is all I'm saying. Azrael does not equal Flowey. This is a point I just wanted to put out there for a second, because I feel like I am arguing from a place of Azrael being Azrael, right? And the way a lot of people think of Azrael is Flowey, because the big Azrael Dreamer sprite here that I'm using from Undertale, this is, like, after he's experienced everything from Flowey. He's gone through, like, multiple timelines where he's murdered everyone just to see what it would feel like. He's quote-unquote empty inside. And then slowly, because he has all the soul power in him, and also Frisk is there to reassure him, he slowly regains his core personality, which is, like, a chill-ass, nice dude who's, like, really regretful over everything he's done and doesn't want his mom to see him because he doesn't want to burden her. Like, if that's the person we're talking about, right, I feel like it's fair to say he wouldn't endanger children. You know? So, I mean, I doubt you were, but if you were writing a comment that was like, oh, but Asriel and Undertale, we don't really know what Asriel would be like without the experience of being Flowey. Other than, like, Kid Asriel, who's just kind of like a nice little lad. And it seems pretty much the same in this universe, according to what people have told us about him so far. So, it's that point of he's too nice again, but literally. What happened to college? That's kind of a weird thing. We don't know technically when the game is taking place, and college does end earlier than high school. So it is possible Asriel could already be done college, and that nobody in the town has realized that he should be back by now. But the other option is he just ditched college early and, like, didn't take his exams and has come back to do this, which he would need a really good reason to do that, right? It would have to be like, I have some hint on how to find Des or something like that. Or, like, everybody in my hometown is about to explode if I don't do something like this. So, yeah, again, the piles of Asriel's dust theory speculates that Asriel never actually went to college. But if that was the case, I think somebody would know. And the argument in that theory is essentially that Asriel, when Toriel or Asgore are wondering how Asriel's doing, they just talk to Chris, because Chris is constantly talking to Asriel online. But it doesn't explain, like, the college records or, like, any of that. Like, would they not have got a thing from the college if Asriel never showed up, being like, your son never showed up. Is he okay? Like, what if he, like, died on the road? You'd think there'd be somebody like, oh, this kid is missing. Maybe we should check this out. Like, he's first year college. He's, like, 18 years old. People would still be looking out for him, right? And there's no way that the Dreamer family, the people that are so, like, hand-holdy, quite literally, that Asgore has to remind himself not to give Chris giant spine-crushing bear hugs all the time, are just, like, so offhanded with Asriel. But who knows? Maybe they are. Maybe that's going to be something we find out in Chapter 3. But I do think the question of what happened to college is something you'd have to answer if you believe in this. And then also King. Again, it's not the strongest point, because maybe King's just going along with him because it suits King's needs. But Asriel is undoubtedly a lightener, unless it's piles of Asriel's dust theory, in which he's mostly a darkener. So, like, why does King respect him so much? And also, why would King not look at Ralsei and be like, oh, are you related to that Knight guy? I like that Knight guy. You know? I don't know. Alright, let's move on to the next implausible theory. Kara Knight. What the hell is going on with my slides? Grrr. I think some of the formatting got messed up, so some of the text is hidden behind the images. Whatever. I'll read it to you anyway and you'll understand. So, where is Kara in this world, right? I mean, Chris seems to be an anagram of Frisk. Like, literally, in terms of the letters. Without the F. Press F to pay respects. So, what happened to Kara? Everything else is almost the same in this world, so where are they? And you could make the argument, obviously, that Chris is Kara. But then, why specifically draw all these differences? You know what I mean? Like, there are similarities, but this sprite I'm using of Chris that looks like Kara was a red herring in Chapter 1 to make us think that Chris was Kara. So it would be kind of weird to, like, flip it and be like, actually, Chris is Kara. But at the same time, who says Kara's even going to be in this story? We have no idea. Because Kara's place in the story, it's kind of taken by the vessel. But we'll get to that later. Chris doesn't save using determination, which would imply there's someone with higher determination out there if it works the same way as Undertale. Which is that this world, the Deltarune that we can experience, the person with the highest determination in it should be able to save with the yellow save points that feature determination. And in Deltarune, it's power, and it's only in the Dark World. Which the Dark Worlds are specifically, like, localized areas. So it's like descending into another world, right? If the Deltarune world is one thing and the person with the most determination in the Deltarune overworld can save, then if you go down a level to a Dark World, now it's like that small group of Lightners that you have to compete with, and then Chris being the one who's able to save because of the red soul or anything, really, makes sense. But that does imply there's someone with higher determination, and someone with higher determination than us, the player, who's with Chris, is a lot of determination. And really, there's only a few entities in Undertale who have ever gotten close. And one of them is Flowey. And one of them is Car. So, there you go. People wouldn't recognize them. It's just a random human in town. They might not even want to interact with a random human in town. Who knows? Caddy summoned a demon? I saw this theory a bit like a year ago, so I wanted to bring it up. Caddy says that she's been like doing research on dark magic and casting protection spells on Noelle. But that would imply that she knows, like, you know, some dark magic. And maybe for some prank or something, you know, tried to summon a demon. And, oh, Kara's the demon that comes when you call their name. So, maybe that comes together. And then that might be why King likes them, because they're not a Lightner, they're a demon. And demons come from darkness. Oh, yeah. At the end of the No Mercy route, Kara says, "Let us erase this pointless world and move on to the next." You can see the next is hidden behind Kara's head, or, well, Chris's head, trying to pretend to be Kara. So, like, maybe this is the next world and it's all a sequel. Whoa! All along. I doubt that, because Toby has specifically tried to make us be like, okay, this is not a direct sequel, but maybe it was a red herring the whole time. They could serve as a dark reflection to Chris, where we see Chris as like, oh, a problem child that's dangerous. And then we get to Kara, who's like actually murderous and vile. Perhaps. Might steal us. So this is an interesting idea. A lot of people have said that, or a lot of people have the feeling that we will one day battle against Chris, right? Because of the whole battle for control arc with Chris, between us, or them, and us as the player. And if that happened, and Kara does happen to have more determination than them, we could end up hanging out with Kara instead, and like having to deal with being stuck with the villain, and maybe getting a little bit of a taste of our own medicine, because now we're not in control, right? And we have to watch Kara do things we wouldn't do. You know, it's almost like, you know, putting us in Chris's shoes and appreciating Chris a little bit more. Connected to Gaster in the Void? I don't know. There was that theory that the second voice that shows up in the Goner Maker sequence, which is like the one that says, you can't choose who you are in this world, is Kara, because the typer values, which is like the little text sounds that are made when somebody's talking, like the Sans is, or Papyrus is, you know, is the same. Although I did also see counter arguments that they both use the generic typer value that like all the NPCs use, so of course it would be the same. But maybe there's a connection there, and that's why Gaster has summoned us, is to stop Kara from destroying the world and moving on to the next one. Maybe. And then Kara is also related to essence. I kind of talked about that in the Asriel slides. Essence is what brings Flowey back to life as Asriel. It's like this just sort of amorphous concept of someone's essence, there's not a better way I could say that, being imbued into an object that their dust falls on if they're a monster. And Kara is also imbued with that through, I mean, their name. When we name our character in Undertale, Kara shows back up. The demon that comes when you call their name. So that kind of is a thing. And then also the red soul seems to be what summons them. So, I mean, the red soul's back now. Maybe they're coming. Who knows? But okay. Chris might not be literally Kara, but they are serving the functional role of Kara in this world. If anyone was going to show up, I would think it would be Frisk, or like some Frisk analog, because Chris is so close to Kara in so many ways. The relationship with Asriel, the general look and being the dreamer's adopted child, the whole knife thing, the chocolate thing, you know, all that stuff. So while they're not literally Kara, and you can make the argument that that means Kara probably maybe exists somewhere in this world, they're pretty much Kara for all intents and purposes. So what would be the point of adding another human who looks almost exactly the same or whatever? Well, no one would recognize this second human in town. Would they not still find another human being in town in general weird? Because there's only one human in this entire town, and it's Chris, and everybody lives with that. But, like, it's not like a shared town, you know what I mean? Like, Chris, there's no human families here. Sorry, I had to adjust in my seat. There's no human families here. It's just Chris, who was adopted by the Dreamers. It seems like almost like a sequestered off monster-only town, which has some, you know, weird implications. But if another human just showed up, I do think there would be some hubbub about it. So, just like with Asriel, they'd have to, like, hide their identity and sneak around. Unless maybe they look exactly like Chris. In which case they could just pretend to be Chris. Who knows? If they aren't literally the same as in Undertale, what connects them to this story? So if it's not literally a continuation of Undertale's story where, you know, we wipe out the world and move on to the next one, why bring Kara into this story? If you want a reflection of Chris, we have the vessel. If you want somebody murderous, you could do that with anybody, really. Even Papyrus could be murderous in this world for all we know. So, like, why bring Kara back? There is, I guess, an argument that Kara technically represents us, the player, but the vessel also does that, so yeah. And additionally, building onto that, right, I just talked about it. If Chris is the Frisk analog, the one that we control and all of that, and they have grown up in the Dreamer household, so they've ended up sort of being like Kara in that they have, like, you know, same tendencies and hair and all of that, then would Kara even be recognizable to us in this world? Like, if Kara grew up with their human family the whole time, what would we have to gain from seeing them again? I don't know. That's just the question. Too obvious. It's about time I brought the too obvious back, huh? Oh, Kara's the bad guy in an Undertale Deltarune story? I can't believe it. It would be like, you know, if Gaster was the bad guy in an Undertale Deltarune story. It'd be like, oh, yeah, it's Gaster. Of course it's Gaster. There's just not a lot going on there. And I mean, it could be developed in the next chapters, but from our viewpoint right now, I don't see it. And finally, if Kara is specifically the demon that comes when you call its name, we named the vessel, not Chris. We specifically did not get to name Chris. And the vessel is like in the void or wherever the vessel is gone. So how would Kara get to the main world if that's truly the reason? How would anyone in the Deltarune world know Kara's name? You know what I mean? So, you know, it seems like maybe the vessel has actually taken the place of Kara in this narrative as the one that represents us, the player, but not being in the main story unless we make some odd choices, perhaps. Speaking of, oh, Gaster's the villain in an Undertale story. Gaster! I don't even, like, I put him here just to say I've covered it. We know literally nothing. There's, like, nothing I can speculate. He set up the story for us, probably. So there's that. But also, Nox against Gaster Knight. We know nothing about him. And just because he set it up doesn't mean he's the villain. In fact, I would say it might even preclude him from being the villain. Because if he set it up just to be the bad guy, why would he even, like... I don't know. It would have to be like an elaborate roleplay situation for that to make sense, which just seems a little odd. So, let's move to our final theory. And it's just a comment. This is somebody's comment that really piqued my interest. So, thank you, Doom Mustard. It's a good name. So, I touched on this in the very first video, if you remember. What if the knight isn't even a person? It's a concept. And that's kind of what this theory is about. So, the knight could be the knife. The knight is always referred to as it in the light world and they in the dark world. I.e., as they say, a darkener. They are an object in the real world, so it's an it. And then in the dark world, it becomes a they because suddenly the it has sentience. You know what I mean? I don't think that's entirely true because Queen does call the knight an it, even when describing creating the fountain. But maybe that's still referring to the knight as the object they are, which the knife is the highest thing here. Because Queen is describing the making of the fountain, so that's before the darkness is able to give the knight life. Or the knight life. It's really hard to say. So that's why it's an it there, and why Sham and other people refer to it as a they, because in Chapter 1, the knight actually did exist in the Dark World. The term long hand is used by Queen, and it's also a term for a knife's handle. I would not have known that. So, you know, that's just kind of like trivia that works. Also, I don't know if that's mentioned here, but Chris is a type of knife as well. And they are the one that wields the knife, so maybe that has something to do with it. Knives are supposed to be tools, but can be used as weapons. So, okay. I want to kind of rephrase this a little bit. Knives can be used as tools, and also can be used as weapons. So, they have a choice. They can choose pacifism or violence. That's interesting. And Doom Mustard, it's a good name, points out that darkners are supposed to be tools for lightners, but King thinks the darkners should fight the lightners. So in other words, the knife is a tool, but also as the knight, it becomes violent or something like that. Chris Knight theories have the whole of Chris not being able to be both the hero and a knight, but if the knight is just a weapon, not Chris themselves, then suddenly the prophecy can still make sense. Which, I mean, I didn't even bring that up when talking about Chris Knight, but I guess it is true that Chris is supposed to be one of the people that defeats the Angel's Heaven, which is supposedly the knight's goal. So how does that work? How does that work? Chris, the human, would have to be replaced, which, I mean, if you believe some vessel theory stuff, then maybe that's how it works, but you never know. When Queen tells the story of the knight, the image she shares is focused on the knife, and not on the person holding it. If she's telling a story about the knight, then obviously if the knight is the knife, she would focus on the knife. And there is the explanation, obviously, that Queen is focusing on the hand and the knife because that's all she could see in the big well of darkness, because we know Queen never actually saw the knight as a person. But if she is presuming that the knight is a knife, then it would make sense to depict it this way. And then metatextual evidence, the theme of control. I mean, being a weapon means you're literally being controlled by someone else. The major villain's a literal tool. Yeah. And most of the other theories, at least in this commenter's opinion, feel like attaching a mismatched plot thread for character development later to the overall Knight thing. Which I have mentioned in terms of like the Des connection stuff, the Noel Knight stuff. It seems like maybe this is something that's going to be developed in the story, but not necessarily through the Knight plotline. Also, I think I said a lot about that for like Papyrus Knight and a bunch of other ones. So this theory doesn't specifically fall into that, but that's also because this theory is, like all the others I've mentioned today, pretty much irrelevant to the main story as we know it so far. I mean, it fits very well thematically, but like I said, there's no concrete evidence. But I want to talk about my own takes on this, so I'm not just stealing somebody's idea. The Knight being an item would explain why King would side with them. I mean, obviously, if the Knight is a Darkener, King's like, hell yeah, you're a Darkener who's being used to create dark fountains. I love it. Whether or not the knife itself has determination is a question, I suppose. But I do want to bring up a crazy theory that I've said multiple times, and somebody left a comment on one of my videos that was like, does this make Chris technically a Darkener? And then I clicked off. And I was like, well, then you'll never get to hear the crazy theories, because we're in the crazy theories video right now, that perhaps Chris not having their original soul, like if they have to tear the soul out to create a dark fountain, would make them kind of like a Darkener. And maybe because, you know, the knife and the body aren't being differentiated at the time, it's like a combination of Chris and the knife that becomes this Knight Darkener, somehow. Ties in with Queen referring to the Knight as an it, and her diagram, which is mentioned. I kind of talked about my other points about it, where it might be a little bit more symbolic and not literal, but I think Queen also describes it as the Knight wielded its weapon and created and made this world. So that's another little bit of a weird catch on it, but you never know. It might be just, you know, to lead us off the track. Again, she's got false information at that moment, so. We have no idea where Chris is hiding the knife they have. This is a pretty big one, because, like, where... I mean, it could just be video game logic, but at the same time, they are walking around into very populous places with this knife somewhere on their person, like a school. It's a little sketchy. But if the knife is like a Darkener that comes to them when they need to make a fountain, then it makes at least some sense of that. At least they're not carrying the knife around everywhere they go. Because if they were carrying the knife around everywhere they went, you'd think the knife would turn into a Darkener when we go into the Dark World, which doesn't really seem to happen. Unless Raul says the knife, which I've heard some people speculate, but again, I digress. This would allow for multiple different people to potentially be the Knight. What if, in a similar way to, like, Rudens, any knife that you use to create a dark fountain becomes the Knight? And in that way, it's not just Chris's knife that can become the Knight, but it is any knife, or at least any knife that's similar. I'm assuming Chris is using some kind of kitchen knife, because, like, what other kind of knife would they get? I guess maybe they could have gotten, like, the worn dagger type knife from Asgore's shop, in the same way they get the dagger from Asgore's garden in Undertale. So maybe it's a real knife, but either way, if multiple different people potentially have this knife, then maybe that could explain why the Knight is able to sort of, like, move independently of Chris. Piles of Azrael's dust. What if the knife really was used to kill Azrael, and Azrael's dust and essence got all over that knife, and now it's become sentient? In the Dark World, anyway, when it has the determination to become sentient. And so that wraps all the way around back to the beginning, baby. It's Azrael Knight all the way down. A knife translating into a knight isn't too far-fetched. I mean, it's shining metal and, you know, it's a weapon, so you could probably think of other things it could become, but I feel like it makes at least some sense for a knife to become a knight. And then finally, it would explain the weird timings and conveniences, which, I mean, we've been talking about this the whole time. about, like, when was the Chapter 2 fountain made? Well, if it's made with any knife at all, potentially, or, like, if it's some sort of weird Darkner hybrid thing, then it doesn't really matter the timing, right? It can just happen. And yeah, do I think this theory is definitely 100% true and is pure awesome logic? Absolutely not. There's pretty much no evidence for it actually in the game, other than reading into things and expounding on, like, Queen's diagram and stuff. Which is fair. That's more than I can say for, like, Kara Knight. But I think it's an interesting concept, and I haven't seen it brought up before. At least not in a serious way. So that's where I leave you with this little Knight series. Who knows, maybe when Chapter 3 and 4 release, we'll have even more to say about the Knight. But honestly, I am glad to be done talking about the topic for now. Like I said, I hope you've enjoyed this little mini series of Knight videos. It's been fun for me, and it's, you know, let me make money. So who can argue with that, right? Become a member today. The next thing I want to do, because somebody made an interesting Twitter post that has motivated this, but I'll leave it a surprise until we get there. The next video I want to make is a video about all the characters in Undertale and which ones we haven't seen yet that might relate to the characters that we already know. So, yeah, that should be fun. I hope you will stay tuned and enjoy. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.